An amnesiac decides he's Mary Richards. Dr. Craig shows his softer side. Dr. Ehrlich grows a conscience. Dr. Caldwell shows his darker side. Doctors Morrison and Westphall annoy Betty White. And Doctors Turner and Chandler get closer. Battle of the Network shows. Join Rick Brooks and Mike Kogel as they explore the TV of the 70s and 80s through hand-picked episodes of their favorite and not-so-favorite series.
Battle of the Network shows. I'm Mike.
And I'm Rick. Hello, everyone.
And today we're going to be talking about a show that we mentioned way back on our, second episode? Came up in our White Shadow episode.
Yeah.
And I think we've made reference to here and there. But it's St. Elsewhere, the NBC MTM medical drama from the early to, I guess, late mid-80s.
Yeah.
It lasted 6 seasons. Mm-hmm. And was part of still part of that era where NBC was transitioning from terrible to successful. But, it was one of those shows they stuck with, maybe because they weren't so successful and were able to. And it has similar DNA to Hill Street Blues by being an MTM drama and similar elements in tone and things like that, but also is definitely a creative continuation from The White Shadow, and frankly has a lot of people that worked on it, that both behind the scenes and on camera, who went on to a lot of other stuff.
Right.
And maybe it's one of those shows that's influential among creative people, maybe not viewers, but it wasn't a huge hit.
Right.
And I think a lot of people know about the finale, which is what we brought up on The White Shadow, which reveals at the end the whole show was in the imagination of an autistic boy. And then because of things that happened on that show and then some later shows, has created this, to me, like the only good internet theory ever, but this Tommy Westphall Universe idea that all these shows are in that kid's imagination. Mm-hmm. Specifically to me, like the touch points on that really quickly are the White Shadow, because character Coolidge from The White Shadow became a recurring character on St. Elsewhere, and Cheers, because at the end of season 3, I believe, some of the doctors went to Cheers and had a beer.
Yeah.
And encountered Norm and Carla and Cliff. And then Homicide later, Ed Begley's character and Alfre Woodard's character both appeared on there. So, and then because Munch, the Detective Munch character on Homicide, has been on like 12 other shows. Yeah. Like any of those shows are connected. And then there are other things that it's looser. I mean, the Cheers universe obviously had 3 or 4 other shows involved with that. So, but things like, Oceanic Airlines got mentioned. So any show that mentions that, which apparently there are a lot of shows that use that, Lost being the famous one, but that puts them in it.
I see.
But anyway, it's also a show that, I had seen a little bit of, some as a kid, and then I had a VHS collection of, I think it's 6 episodes, but it's a show I always wanted to watch because of its reputation and because it's creatively connected to Homicide, and I love that show and The White Shadow, and for years Hulu had the first season up, and I had started watching that, but then only recently they put the rest up.
Yeah.
So I ended up, in preparation for the season, watching the whole series.
Right. Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
I thank you, and the listeners thank you as well.
And I got to say, I like it. I like it a lot. It has some of the qualities of older TV that aren't around anymore, that we don't necessarily like as much, or it's still walking that line between serialized and, episodic.
Right.
Like, I think it's more accessible than Hill Street in terms of the serialization, but it's still, even the episode we're going to talk about has only one of the stories, and actually none of the stories are isolated to that episode, but...
Right.
But I think you can still probably follow most of them. So, behind the scenes, from what I understand, Bruce Paltrow was like the executive producer, but Joshua Brand and John Falsey are credited with creating it, and then Mark Tinker and John Mazius have it developed by credit. And what I can get from a YouTube interview with Joshua Brand, it's all a little weird. Like after The White Shadow, they were, talking to all the people that worked on that, MTM was, getting ideas. And he had this idea based on a friend of his of doing a show set in a teaching hospital, which had never been done before. And he pitched that to Grant Tinker, and Grant Tinker approved it. And then Brand and Falsey and Mazius, I think, all went on vacation, and they came back, and all the MTM people were excited because NBC had ordered from them separately basically the same idea. And supposedly for 13, they wanted 13 episodes written and made. So suddenly that was like the focus, and Brand was a little put out, and Falsey was going to go off and do a mini series about Ireland or something. And because it was this seemingly high pressure thing, Brand ended up getting him and those other guys involved. But he also he had complained to Bruce Paltrow. He's like, well, I had already sold you this idea, and now we're doing it for NBC, but it's not my idea. And Paltrow asked him what he wanted, and he's, he just wanted to write the pilot or something. So I guess he and Brand wrote the pilot, but then it might have gotten retooled. I don't know. But it's all very confusing. And then, he said he came up with the characters and the basic idea, and then at the end of the first season, he was, as he said, asked to leave. And Falsey could have stayed, but he didn't. And those guys, of course, went on to do Northern Exposure and some other stuff together and separately. And, John Falsey, he died just last year, right?
Yeah, within last year, yeah.
And then from the 2nd through the 5th season, Tom Fontana, who went on to do Homicide and Oz and all sorts of stuff, and John Mazius, who created at least Touched by an Angel and some other stuff, were kind of running the writing show. And it, the show changes, but based on my viewing, I feel like that's the show people remember is more those seasons.
Okay.
It still has the characters from the first season and the basic idea, and certainly in the general tone, which is a darker tone than you would expect. I've heard a lot of people involved with it talking about, how many people die in this hospital, that it's not a happy-go-lucky show about medicine necessarily. But they did inject sort of more, I think, of the sort of meta touches and some of the humor. The first season has some of that stuff too, but it just feels like, to me, like those seasons feel stronger or more adventurous. So, and then, in front of the camera, just actors include, of course, Denzel Washington and Howie Mandel and David Morse, and the young actors and Alfre Woodard, and these are people who a lot of people know who they are. Obviously, everyone knows who Denzel is. And then you have the older actors, William Daniels, who, of course, another generation knows from Boy Meets World, and Norman Lloyd. And those guys are still, Norman Lloyd is like 104.
Yeah, he's
a guy who worked with Orson Welles.
Yeah.
And William Daniels, I think, is 91. And then the other one is Ed Flanders, who unfortunately killed himself. But to me, watching all these, he's like the standout actor. He's just one of those guys. And apparently other actors felt like he was one of the great actors of his generation. And apparently, I guess he felt underappreciated. That was one of the things driving his depression and other bad things. But the other thing that stood out to me is the kind of the number of topics they covered. And it is the kind of show where you can do that socially relevant thing. It's a perfect location for that. But you also get the time capsule thing, especially over the course of the show, they did like 3 different stories about AIDS, and you kind of see the changing understanding of that and attitude towards it. So like the first time they did it, a doctor diagnoses it, but then it's still such a mystery. He's just like, he doesn't want to be involved with the patient.
Right.
Supposedly because he has a family, like no one else there has a
Right.
family. But that character too is like, turns out to be a rapist, so whatever. And then the second story involves Mark Harmon's character, who is heterosexual, but gets it from being promiscuous. And then in the last season, there's like an ongoing one that involves Kyle Secor, who was on Homicide, playing character dying, and Bruce Greenwood is playing his doctor and kind of is homophobic. And then there's an accident, and maybe he got the guy's blood mixed with his blood, and he's worrying about that. And they treat the patient. The TV show treats the patient with a lot of dignity, and trying to just show what he's going through as much as they can,
Right.
given the time. But they also autism, which I don't know if anybody was talking about that in the 80s, and obviously things like cancer things and heart transplants and artificial hearts and right to die issues and abortion and in vitro fertilization, which comes up in this episode, and like the privatization of healthcare is a big part of the 6th season, and the cost of healthcare, homelessness, racism, just everything.
Right.
Really, famine in Africa. So it's a really good look back at that time too, and to see how the discussion was different, but how many of those things are still being discussed today.
Right.
Certainly around cost of healthcare and all of that. And then this whole idea of well, what is a teaching hospital, and is that the right way to do things? And all of these people are certified as doctors, but they're still learning how to be doctors.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that, it's still, the human biology is still such a mystery that sometimes 2 doctors can come up with 5 diagnoses and all be wrong.
Yeah.
Which is a little scary, but I think it's good to show people that too.
Yeah, so for you, it holds up well. I think it's interesting you talk about it being the time capsule aspect, because it does seem like a real 80s show, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's really mentioned as such. Like, to me, I didn't watch St. Elsewhere hardly at all, ever. Every now and then it would show up in reruns, but not long enough to really follow it. And still, I think the series isn't on DVD. It's only that first season is on DVD.
Yeah, and when you watch them on Hulu, you can tell the first season looks really good, and then everything after that, there's an occasional episode that looks good that was probably on, maybe there was a best of DVD.
Oh, okay.
And then a lot of them like have audio issues and like seem a little sped up and stuff. Just really inconsistent, and they're even occasionally out of order.
Yeah.
Or the descriptions are wrong or something. I don't know.
It seems to me like it's kind of been a forgotten show. Like, I always did associate with Hill Street Blues for a variety of reasons, and I think even then it was associated with Hill Street Blues.
Yeah.
Same network, same time slot. I think it was like a Wednesday 10 o'clock show. Like, Hill Street Blues was like a Thursday show, but it just never seemed to get the attention that Hill Street Blues did. It got good critical attention. It got a lot of awards, but not quite as many as Hill Street Blues.
Yeah.
It was never really had big breakout rating success. So, I mean, to me, it wasn't like I consciously avoided it, but I just was never exposed to it very much. So, in preparation for this, I watched the episode we're going to talk about and some other ones just to kind of get a feel for the show. And it does interest me. I actually think I actually enjoy it more than Hill Street Blues.
Yeah.
Yet, I was also kind of baffled by some of the serialized elements. It kind of surprised me how much it was like, there's so many things. I might have said this about Hill Street Blues too, but I can really see St. Elsewhere being the kind of show where it gets better the more you watch it, and that's already I'm starting to find that. Like, the more you kind of appreciate it, the more you watch it, but it's not necessarily accessible to like first-time viewers, and that might have hurt it a little bit. And also, I'll say this, playing devil's advocate a little bit, I wonder if maybe there was a little too much of the meta stuff, and maybe too much breaking the fourth wall. And we talked earlier this, well, we did talk earlier this season about Moonlighting.
Yeah.
And that's a show that often broke the fourth wall, but it kind of fit with the tone of it. One thing that strikes me is you talking about the actors and people involved with the show talking about the darkness of the show. And I think if you looked at the episode descriptions and I was kind of like reading through like what happened to like a lot of the characters and stuff and kind of following that, it says, man, they did do a lot of like heavy stuff.
Yeah.
However, I don't really get that sense when I'm watching the episodes. Part of it is because they were so willing to mix tone and do these kind of meta aspects. To me, if I'm watching like a lot of the more serious dramatic aspects are balanced out and maybe even superseded by some of the other aspects. To me, the things that stand out to me about the show are the finale, I think. I wonder if they might have done themselves a disservice, and this was years ago, but I think the finale is all that a lot of people remember about the show.
Right.
And you could argue that, well, it's better than not remembering anything, but in order to get that one little sort of cheeky commentary in there, they cast aspersions on the entire series and alienate a lot of people, but more importantly, maybe, they made sure that was what was going to be all people would talk about for the show.
Yeah.
And speaking of cheeky, one of the other things I remember from not really watching the show is they had an episode where Flanders or Westphall mooned somebody, and because I remember it being a big thing.
Right.
Like they showed like, in the words of Beavis, bare butt on TV.
Yeah.
And I remember that being a big thing, and that's one of the other episodes that stood out to me.
Yeah.
And
he mooned Ronnie Cox.
Yeah.
And that was actually his sort of, he basically left the show.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think he mooned the show, but
right.
I think he just wanted to leave, or maybe his contract was up. I mean, he came back for one episode and then the finale, but which is a reason to me season 6 isn't as good because he's not around. But yeah, it did. That stood out. I didn't mean to slow your roll there.
No, but that's another, and I think I could be wrong on this too. But I'll bet if you asked like a lot of people who to name like maybe 3 people that were on St. Elsewhere,
yeah,
I think Norman Lloyd and Ed Flanders sadly would probably not be in the top 3.
Right.
People might say Denzel Washington, although he didn't. I'm still trying to figure out what he actually did in the show because it didn't seem like he did a lot, even though he was there longer than I thought.
Yeah.
But Howie Mandel would probably be one of the names that would come up first,
yeah.
And he just seems to be associated with the show, and he was kind of more like more of like an irreverent character, I guess.
Yeah, he gets more dramatic as it goes. I mean, his character died, and there's a whole episode where they're reviving him, and he's in the afterlife.
Yeah.
And probably from that point on, he gets a little more serious. And even before that, he's both.
I mean, that's another episode that I remember not watching it. I've
Yeah.
never seen it, but I remember that being a thing. I seem to remember like more like maybe it was like that with anything, but more some of the more gimmicky episodes and
Right.
meta episodes that stand out. And you could have made a reference to like they had a doctor that there's a rapist.
Yeah.
And that's something like I didn't really know how that resolved until kind of watching some of the episodes you recommended. And that to me is like they took an incredible risk
Yeah.
and like a major creative thing by having somebody kind of like a main cast member do this. However, I also watched some of the episodes right around that and kind of the way that played out. It's a little cartoonish. It's not really entirely realistic. I think one thing I would throw out there is it seems like some of their best, despite some of their more maybe highbrow instincts and some of the stuff they were doing that was very good, they couldn't resist kind of doing it with a wink and like having like and like the episode we'll talk about having some kind of meta aspects, having kind of over the top aspects. I don't know how much you want to give away, but the way the rapist story ends, it's kind of like a very dramatic thing.
Yeah, I do want to talk about that because I remember hearing about that, that like seeing about it in TV Guide or something. But I mean, that character was a train wreck from the beginning. Like the first season, he's like a pill addict and just does all sorts of stuff, and then the second season he starts to get back on his feet, but he ends up there's like an incident in the ER and it involves the person who eventually kills him, but where he breaks some protocol and then he gets in trouble, and there's a court thing involving that, and the implication is that's sort of the breaking point, and he starts going on this. He starts raping women. I mean, I think the first person is just someone visiting someone, but then a couple residents, and it goes over half of like the second season and half of the beginning of the third season. And to me, the most interesting aspect of that was not the melodrama of it, but that they had the female characters discussing it. Like there's a scene where a bunch of the female characters are sitting around a table in the cafeteria, just discussing this and what it means to them. And I can't imagine that had ever been done on TV before. And maybe the ultimate melodrama of it is a disservice to that. I don't know. One of the victims kind of loses her mind for a while. Another almost victim, it's an attempt, and actually Howie Mandel's character stops it. But she also has an eating disorder, and she ends up killing herself. So eventually is the nurse Shirley Daniels, played by Ellen Bry, and like in those early seasons, she's one of my favorite characters. There's just something about her performance and stuff that I liked, but she does like entrap him so that she can kill him. And yeah, I guess that's a little over the top. It worked for me, but maybe because I was invested in her character. And then it's kind of a tragic thing for her. I mean, she wasn't a victim, and yet she decided to stop this. And then she does get caught and comes back in one episode because she's got something wrong. So they bring her from prison to the hospital, and she kind of gets treated shabbily by the doctors, which makes sense. And there's some question about her mental health. But I can see your point too.
Well, in a sense, I mean that's interesting too. Like she kind of avenged them.
Yeah.
I mean, why do they like shun her? Why would they treat her poorly?
Because she's still a murderer.
But
and
all kinds of murders go in there, and she's kind of
and there's also an incident like her roommate dies, and they think she did it, like an Angel of Mercy thing, and it turns out it's a nurse.
Oops.
Yeah, and she had done some things. I mean, so when he was doing it, he wore a ski mask, and then after he died, his wife had a baby, and there's like a baby shower or something, and it's before she's gone to prison, and they're having this baby shower, and there's she sewed a little ski mask, knitted a ski mask for the baby.
Well, that's in poor taste.
Yeah. And later says to someone, "Oh, did she get my ski mask?" Oh. And she clearly has kind of lost it then.
Yeah.
But then when she comes back, it doesn't seem like she just seems angry. Because she's in prison.
Well, another interesting thing, the thing that interests me kind of about that storyline is, and I think it seems appropriate to talk about because it was like, obviously it's such a big part of the show, but like the David Morse character, one of our favorites, I guess Jack Morrison is his name. Now, apparently because they kind of alluded to this in some of the episodes I saw, like he apparently kind of stood by this character and was kind of like, not taking his side, but he wanted to believe the best in him, and it seems like some of the other doctors resented him because they thought, hey, this guy's a jerk, and even without the rapist thing, but it seems like Morrison was kind of being loyal to him. And I find that kind of interesting. But I would hope after the fact, everybody's like, well, he turned out to be a rapist,
right.
Heck with that guy, and they wouldn't be defending him, his memory against, the vigilante that killed him.
Right, yeah. No, I don't think it.
But it sounds like maybe people were already against him and that there wasn't anything.
Yeah, people were against the Peter White character,
Yeah.
and Morrison got some blowback from that. Because he stood up for him during all these, even though he knew he was popping pills and doing things, and sometimes suffered at the hands of his misbehavior, and yet he just couldn't. Partly because that character for most of the series is kind of a soft touch.
Right. Well,
and then of course he's later the victim of a prison rape. So.
Well, I guess I'm just saying that I'm just kind of speculating. I mean, I like the show a little bit more than I expected. I think as I watch some more episodes and learn a little bit, but I think the serialization of it probably has hurt it.
Sure.
And which it did the kind of show it wanted to do. So and I think I'm just wondering if maybe some of these other touches and some of the being a little bit playful behind the camera may have taken away from some of the other things that they were trying to achieve. Maybe not, but I think the legacy of the show is more on some of those other things than some of like the more serious drama and some of the quality writing and acting that maybe the show could have been known for.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I think if you watch it, like those things are not the dominant. It's not like every episode is meta.
True.
Or even if some of the more subtle meta things are just like some TV character's name being on the PA announcements, or somebody like quoting a line from a song, or making a vague allusion to something. Now, William Daniels, Dr. Craig does mention a number of times having served in Korea with B.J. Honeycutt. But as we know, also from this episode, Trapper John exists as a TV character.
But those are little things.
Yeah,
but it kind of takes
things.
Me out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't. That takes me out of it as enjoying the show, but as far as like it reinforces the fact that it's a show about television, and it kind of, to me, it hurts any chance of like being taken more seriously, I think. And not just like things like that, but some of like the mixing of like the comedy with the drama within a show.
Yeah.
I would kind of put in the same category. Like, and maybe it's good not to have a total like something like ER, which had some comedy elements and way over the top melodrama, but it was more of like a consistently more dramatic. And again, they weren't trying to do that show. They were trying to make something more well rounded. But I'm just saying, to me, that might have been what happened. I enjoy that mix of it, but it definitely makes me look at the show a little bit differently. I think the tone is a lot more is kind of all over the place a little bit, in some of the same way like a Hill Street Blues was, and I think I had kind of the same things to say about that.
I mean, I'm not bothered by that when it's done well, and I think it's done well here. And I guess, I mean, to me, like the idea of a show at least partially being about being a show doesn't bother me because I know it's a show. Like I know the characters are not real people, but I understand as a viewer and reader and that you still relate to them. So somebody pointing out to me that they're a character is not going to make me suddenly go, oh, these people aren't real. Right. It's not going to ruin my investment in them. And I think, but I understand that for some people that might, if that's off-putting, it might not be the show for you. But
well, like I think like Homicide, I think was a much better show. Is like It, like with the drama, Homicide did it, or like The Wire, kind of go up, further on the tree. Like The Wire happened to be like one of the funniest shows ever, I think. Yeah. But to me, the comedy on that never took away from the drama that they were doing. Right. And it worked very well because it was all kind of like a similar tone. Yeah. Whereas St. Elsewhere, it seems to me like sometimes it's like kind of separate parts kind of put together and not necessarily meshing. But, I haven't seen a lot of it, so that's just my initial thoughts. And I think...
Well, I'm thinking too, that like, I don't think, like usually I don't think if there's a more serious story, that the comedy's probably not happening in that story where it's happening in another story. And, if you think about a hospital or even a town or something, something horrible could be going on in one room and something ridiculous going on in another room and nobody knows. You just don't know what's going on there. Or that a more serious version of that is one family could be losing someone and the other family could be taking a baby home or taking someone home who's recovered from surgery or whatever. And, I think that fits the idea of this place. And my sense too is that besides no one had done a show about a teaching hospital, medical shows had not really covered the whole hospital before. I don't know. I mean, I haven't, other than
like surgery, and
medical center,
ER, admission, like all kinds of different pathology and even mental health,
orderlies, and again, kind of like we talked about with Hill Street, the whole top down, at least the sort of management all the way down to the orderlies and nurses and treating them all equal in terms of creative respect. Like I mean, again, I haven't seen a lot, but like when we talked about medical center, it seemed like there were 2 doctors and a nurse in that entire complex. Or I assume something like Ben Casey is about Ben Casey. It's not about the whole thing.
I think they do get into some of the bureaucracy in like Ben Casey and Dr. Kildare.
Okay.
But they are focusing, and even in Kildare, you do get like sort of like the phenomenon of being like residents and working your way up the ladder and things like that. I think maybe more probably in the 70s. I think something like Marcus Welby and Trapper John were definitely more like generic, for lack of a better word, and even like more narrowly focused. So I think that's a good point. That St. Elsewhere it is showing all parts of the hospital experience instead of focusing on just like an ER or whatever.
Right, and I guess if you look at it, that's maybe like an indirect influence, because it seems like almost any medical show now is, even ER was to some extent following that. I mean, it showed places beyond the ER.
Yeah.
Eric LaSalle's character wasn't just an ER surgeon, right? He was a surgeon.
Right.
Who was sometimes scheduled in the ER.
Right.
And I mean, I haven't seen Grey's Anatomy, but I get the sense that, I mean, that was about young doctors and all of that. And I don't know about Chicago Hope, which of course came from some of these same people too. That was more a fancy hospital, cutting edge hospital.
Yeah, and as one kind of more little example of what I'm talking about, I just thought of the great Florence Hallop. Who would go on to be a bailiff on Night Court for a while. She was like a recurring character.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing, like, it seems like to me, like, and maybe some past Doctor shows, she would be like a thing that would go through, like, one episode, she'd have, like, a little story arc.
Yeah.
But in this, I saw her, like, in multiple episodes just that I was watching, and clearly, like, was a regular character. And I don't know how her story ends, but...
Not well.
Yeah, but everything with her, it seems like it's almost kind of like a comic relief. Like and how could it not be? I mean she's a very good actress, and it's amusing. I'm not unamused by it, but it's kind of like, okay, she's there a lot, and
she's playing a very demanding patient, and she keeps coming in for different things, and she's hard on everybody. And I mean, there are a couple of dramatic things. One, she meets a guy who's like a old school comedian, and they kind of fall for each other, and then he just falls dead in the hospital. And Stephen First's character, Elliot, is his doctor, and then like the two of them have a touching moment in the chapel, and they're both hurt over it. And then later, Miss Huffnagel dies, and part of it seems to be because doctors kept passing her on. Like even like not just the residents, but even Ed Flanders, Dr. Westphall goes in. He just like and passes her on to someone else.
Yeah.
And so it's just all. I think that's the thing that ends up being Dr. Craig's fault. He does something in surgery that, like he nicks a thing and has to take blame for it finally. I think there's some thing where that happens, but anyway, that's an interesting thing. Well, and I think, right, a normal medical show would just be guest star of the week, and then they go. And sometimes that's the case, but sometimes there are patients that come back, or they come back after years.
I think one thing that we can agree on is that for some reason, I mean, St. Elsewhere had 100-some episodes, 6 seasons, but yet it doesn't seem to be quite as well remembered as some of the other shows of its time.
Yeah.
And it just kind of makes me wonder, like, well, why is that? I'm not quite sure. And it doesn't. Hill Street Blues, I think, is kind of a very similar situation, and maybe it was hurt in reruns for some of the same reasons, but it seemed like Hill Street Blues is like a go-to. And maybe it had like a sexier story as far as like being so low rated and coming back and being a prestige like kind of leader for NBC. And St. Elsewhere seems to maybe always be kind of in that show's shadow, and maybe that's another part of it, that it fairly or not, it was just linked with it and always kind of a little brother to Hill Street Blues.
Yeah. Now, I did notice in the second season, it got 4 out of 6 Writing Emmy nominations, and Hill Street got the other 2.
Wow,
and
really?
St. Elsewhere won.
That's something.
Yeah, I didn't even know they did 6 nominations, and I think Ed Flanders won Best Actor twice, and William Daniels got it at least once.
That's pretty impressive.
Which is another meta joke in the show. They keep having this Doctor of the Year award that I think it comes up in this episode, actually, that Dr. Craig wants and keeps not getting.
So they won 3 out of 6. 3 out of 6 years that show won the Best Actor.
I think so, yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and some other people won. I think maybe Bonnie Bartlett won an Emmy, or at least got nominated for playing Dr. Craig's wife. And, I think they did okay. But
I think maybe in its time,
I think all the things
something
you're saying
right to stay as long as they were in the air without being a really big ratings hit.
Right.
But I don't know, just now it seems like, are they really? I think there's a fervent fan base that's upset that they haven't been on DVD.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I think it does deserve more recognition.
Right.
I'm glad we're talking about it, but it's just there's something that seemed to have held it back.
I mean, if you think about all these creative people I've mentioned who are involved in it, none of them are people who have had huge successes. I mean, in terms of ratings, I mean, Homicide was always on the bubble. It's not like Oz was Oz started the HBO ball rolling, but no one includes it in the, it's The Sopranos, Wire, and Deadwood that people talk about. Northern Exposure was sort of always kind of on the bubble, right?
Yeah, and
Touched by an Angel, that was a huge hit, but as far as I know, John Mazes just created it. He didn't
they do I'll Fly Away, like Brandon,
Yes.
and that was kind of like a
critical,
but not commercial hit, right?
Yeah, I think John Mazes maybe did Providence, which was a little more of a commercial hit, maybe not a critical hit.
Yeah.
And of course, The White Shadow wasn't that successful. But so maybe they just nobody has commercial instincts at MTM.
Yeah.
Even Botchko.
I think of all these shows, though, it seems like, there's shows that are thought of, like a lot of those are shows that are kind of something you said earlier, thought of as for being influential to like people within TV and like critics and creative people, like The Wire and Homicide clearly is beloved by a lot of people in that sphere as well.
And like we talked about with The White Shadow, and I think Hill Street, part of it's not even the influence of the show so much as the people working on it learned how to make TV and then taught other, Tom Fontana learned how to make TV, and then he taught David Simon how to make TV. And David Simon has taught people who worked for him how to make TV.
Right.
And that's a pretty important thing regardless of the success of the things. And to me, a cool thing, a lot of people in that business are not the types to pass on any knowledge to anyone that would allow them to succeed.
Yeah, that's true.
So I guess we should get into this episode here, which it sounds like maybe you were not totally into, but
no, I did like this episode, and I'm not faulting us picking this episode at all, but I think some of the other episodes I watched I enjoyed a little bit more, and for various reasons. But I think this is a good example of the show. It seems like. I just want to point out when this aired. To kind of put this in context, it was the 7th episode of season 4. It's called Close Encounters. So it premiered November 20th, 1985, and also on TV that night were a couple of our favorites, like shows that you and I have talked about that haven't really gone into. But St. Elsewhere was on at 10 o'clock on NBC, but Highway to Heaven was at 8 o'clock. Which was, and actually I think that was maybe the highest rated show of the night, like one of them. It was actually then at 9 o'clock, Helltown with Robert Blake.
Wow, what a dramatic night on Wednesday.
Yeah, you got Heaven and Hell, and then Elsewhere, the Oblivion,
Limbo.
St. Elsewhere. Yeah. CBS had a TV movie called, going up against St. Elsewhere at 10 was The Equalizer. And at 8 o'clock there's a TV movie called Lost in London with Emmanuel Lewis and Ben Vereen. Not related to Webster, but Emmanuel Lewis apparently goes over to London and becomes involved with a group of, say it with me, street urchins.
Urchins?
Yes, of course. Like Urkel, was an urchin.
Right, yeah.
And I kind of remember that TV movie being, I don't remember watching it, but I remember that thing. So on ABC, at 8 o'clock, leading off was The Insiders, their Miami Vice ripoff. Oh. That I'm kind of fascinated by. I kind of want to track down some episodes of that used the like a Genesis song as the.
Yes, yeah, that had the guy with that looked like he was from Ready for the World.
Yeah. Yep, and they were like undercover like journalists solving crimes or something like that, or
right,
and then Dynasty and the Colbys. So that was Wednesday night, just before Thanksgiving, apparently.
So probably the Colbys won that 10 o'clock slot.
I think so, yeah. And Dynasty did very well at the time, but NBC was like way down. Highway to Heaven actually did surprisingly well, but maybe not surprising when it was going up against a 2-bit Miami Vice and
Emmanuel Lewis
being a street urchin.
Right.
So that was the night, and that was what led us to this episode.
Yeah, and I confess I did pick it partly because of the meta aspect of it. But then when I was rewatching, I was like, oh, this has more actors in it than I thought. Because part of the thing with the residents is it seems like the actors' contracts were not for full seasons.
Yeah.
So it was very infrequent to get everybody in there, and a couple in the first or the second season, and I think the last season, Denzel's MIA for like half of those seasons. I'm pretty sure both is when he was filming movies.
Okay. Yeah,
like if you look at the timeline, it looks like he was doing a soldier story around that.
Okay.
The time of the second season, and I think the 6th season, maybe he was doing the Stephen Biko movie.
So he was on essentially all 6 seasons.
Yeah.
Which surprised me.
And
in this episode, he was pretty prominent, but
yeah.
But it just seems like, man.
I don't think they ever quite nailed down what to do with that character. But on the other hand, he's already Denzel.
Yeah, he's very strong screen presence whenever
Yeah.
he's in there. Yeah, that's one thing I did want to bring up though, the fact that like in any given episode, like a good handful of the main characters might not be there.
Yeah.
And,
So in this case, no Howie Mandel, no Stephen First, unfortunately. But you get your Ed Begley,
Yeah.
your Mark Harmon, and his character is on his way. I mean, he's going to be out by the middle of that season.
oh, okay, well,
He's
it
already
seems
on
like
the road there.
Yeah, they're going towards that.
And you got David Morse, and of course you have Ed Flanders as Westfall, and so he's I forget what his title is, but he's like the chief of.
Oh,
he's
yeah.
like the chief teacher.
So they have like a chief of services,
Yeah, that's
a chief of surgery,
Yeah.
and a chief of, and the other Flanders
yeah.
is the chief of chief of medicine, is it, or
Something like
something
that.
more? Yeah.
I think. I mean, he was in charge of the students, and then in this season, someone else comes in and kind of takes over some of his duties. But
By the way, I agree 100% with you. He's great, and
Yeah.
and just I can watch him like I could watch the whole show being about him. I mean,
Yeah.
I like the diversity of the cast and everything, but he definitely seems like the heart and soul.
yeah, he can. I mean, there's like this great humanity in his eyes and like caring, but he can also be a total grump. And
Yeah.
like he's the character that all the students go to, but he's playing. That's who he's playing to. You can see why they would go to that guy.
Yeah, I think a lot of like some of the episodes I've happened to have seen, like I
Yeah.
saw like the 50th anniversary
Yeah.
of St. Elsewhere episode, which is excellent and which gives you a lot of his backstory. But also like some of the other ones I've seen, I haven't necessarily seen the gruffer side of him. Maybe sometimes with like David Morse or whatever, but a lot of times he's like in contrast to like Dr. Craig.
Yeah.
So he comes off as like a good guy in comparison because
Right.
Craig is totally like selfish, and
Yeah. There's
There's-
a good in the second season. There's a little scene where they're eating lunch together, and like Craig is feeling down. He's like, well, why not? Why don't people like me? And Westfall's like, well, you're prejudiced, you're arrogant, you're everything that's wrong, which he is. He's
yeah.
I mean, he is like this northeastern kind of prejudice against everyone who's not a wealthy white man.
Yeah.
Really. But he's also just kind of just a general snob too.
Yeah.
Or that's that's his exterior protection as being this, and he has a right to be confident because he is a really good surgeon. So it's not that. I mean, I don't even know if arrogance. Like I associate that with false confidence, and his confidence is not false, but I guess it is in other aspects of life. But he knows how to cook things. He knows how to do everything. He has the answer, and he's kind of insufferable. But then he does say to Westfall, he's like, well, being everything to everybody isn't so great either, or something. And it's like, yeah, that's what Westfall is. He's whatever people want him to be, or people project a lot on him.
Right.
And
I mean,
then Norman Lloyd is Auslander, who's he's like running the hospital essentially.
I mean, I think one thing that we haven't mentioned for people that watch is the hospital, like St. Elsewhere isn't the real name of the hospital, but
Right.
it's like considered a rundown, like it's a second-rate hospital is the reputation of it.
Yeah, it's like so. It was a Catholic hospital, and then the city bought it, and it's like in a rough neighborhood, and it's kind of a dumping ground ER, and it doesn't have a great reputation. But
In the Boston area.
yeah, and Craig is there because he gets to be in charge of surgery, and not just another person at a fancy hospital.
Yeah, that was something I was going to ask you, but then I think one of the episodes kind of made it clear why he was there. I was kind of wondering, well, why is he there? They explained why he sticks around because he has such disdain
Yes.
for so many things, and clearly could belong at another hospital. Why does he stick around here? But they do address that. So.
And he and Westfall were residents there. And like you mentioned, that 50th anniversary, which has a lot of flashbacks and things. So Westfall actually grew up in the neighborhood, and Auslander has been there since the 40s or something.
Yeah.
And
So you got these guys that have like this core group who are running the hospital that have like a strong attachment to a hospital that many people outsiders look at
Right.
with contempt. Including, I did watch the Cheers crossover,
Yeah.
which is an audacious thing to do that to begin with. So they go into the Cheers set.
yeah,
And there's no laugh track, but they're the Cheers characters. And Carla just starts yelling at them when she finds out that they're from
Right.
that hospital because she had a bad experience, I guess.
yeah, having a baby there or
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
And it was like, oh, that's kind of weird. I mean, that to me was a little jarring because it made it seem like, and granted, it's Carla, and maybe she's just like, the idea is that, like, well, she had a kid there and
Yeah.
she's tired of having kids. But it almost seemed like it was, for me, just watching like a handful of episodes, it was one of the first examples of somebody, of like proof or like some kind of sign that it's not a quality hospital.
Right.
I mean, there's clearly indications like I see like leaks and stuff and like physical sometimes parts of the hospital being shabby, but that was one of
Yeah.
the first signs of like somebody like attacking the hospital for being being a bunch of quacks or incompetents and actually people getting subpar service there.
Right.
Because it seems like most of the doctors, and you mentioned like some of, one of the more erratic ones, but most of the doctors that we see, they're good, or at least like the David Morse character is well-meaning. It's not, brilliant, but
right.
I mean, Dr. Craig is like a great doctor, so.
Yeah, and I think the other senior doctors are good doctors too.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Cheers one is odd. I really enjoyed it, but it's like, it's like a neither fish nor fowl kind of thing. Like everyone seems out of context or out of phase.
Yeah, and other stuff goes on in that episode too.
Yeah,
and actually,
it's like two segments or something there in the bar.
But. Yeah, and that's where like Westphall says that he's not coming. Yeah, he's going to leave the hospital, which is kind of a big thing.
Right.
Kind of a big moment in the show, and they introduce it in that setting, which is kind of an interesting thing to do.
Yeah, and near the end of the first season, there's an episode where David Morse is like wandering around Boston with his baby, and he actually goes to the real Cheers bar, and he's like, let's go somewhere where everybody knows our name. So it's like, but I think that just to hit on that meta thing again, is like, because it's supposedly in this kid's imagination that anything can go. The Cheers can be a TV show and a real bar, or as we'll see briefly in this episode, the White Shadow can be a TV show. And yet one of the characters can work at the hospital.
Yes, well...
in other words, I'm saying the success of that ending is that they found a way to explain away all the inconsistencies of the series.
Right.
The ultimate retcon.
And it definitely took some brass to end it like that, I'm sure, too. So.
Yeah. So this episode, as you said, is called Close Encounters, and it's like 5 storylines going on. So there's one involving that's been going on for a few episodes at that point. An astronaut who came in, and he's had some sort of paralysis, Robert Guillaume-Barre syndrome.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah. I can't remember the name.
It causes like severe mumbling of sarcastic remarks.
Yes. Yeah.
At any given time.
And Dr. Morse has been treating him, but he's also like going through some sort of mental break where he wants to get back to space so he can see God. And he's having dreams about it. And he definitely ends up trying to kill himself. He might succeed, I forget. But I did watch 6 seasons.
Yeah.
And then there's a thing with Ed Begley's character, who we haven't talked about a lot, but...
Thank God for that.
Dr. Ehrlich.
No, I'm just...
He might be the resident characters, he might be the one who gets the most screen time over the course of the thing. Not many episodes without him.
Yeah, I would think if I did like my little informal exercise earlier, I would say Ed Begley would probably be in the top 3 too.
Yeah.
If you ask people who was on St. Elsewhere, he would come to mind.
He might be a little polarizing, but the character's a little polarizing. I mean, he's someone calls him the department clown, and in the early seasons, he and Craig have a very contentious relationship, like a father-son thing.
Yeah.
But, and then the other thing, like in the second season, there's like a running gag for about 10 episodes straight where someone calls him a pig.
He's like aspirational. He's kind of like sucking up to Craig, right?
Yeah. So he wants to be a surgeon.
Right, and Craig's not giving him that kind of approval.
He doesn't give anyone that. Yeah. But so there's a thing with him and Mark Harmon's character, and then there's a thing, I forget when it happened, but so Dr. Craig had a son who had gotten married, and his wife was pregnant, and then they had his son was had drug problems, and they had a horrible car accident. His son died, of course, in the ER at St. Eligius, and the daughter's been in a coma, but they were able to deliver the baby, and the Craigs were taking care of her, but the will said that the in-laws got the baby, and they're like working class people. So in this episode, he's getting ready to transport the daughter back home, so she's still in a coma. And like that's a serialized thing that goes on for essentially from when it happens to the end of the show.
Yeah.
The baby's always a part of the discussion. And then there's a thing with Denzel's character, Dr. Chandler, and Alfre Woodard's character, Dr. Turner. And certainly by today's standards, I don't think this would be going on. But I mean, she's the chief of obstetrics, and he's in rotation under her, but they're also romantically involved, and they've been trying to help a couple have a baby. So this is the latest attempt at that.
And kind of, you mentioned like the in vitro thing. There's a lot more cutting edge at the time.
Right. Yeah.
Not at all taken for granted back then.
Yeah, and they had already tried like an artificial insemination, and so in terms of just a medical show educating people.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and so I think actually, as we talk about it, and we haven't gotten to another one, but the Denzel storyline here in Alfre Woodard is probably the least interesting, like dramatically. There's not a whole lot going on. However, I can imagine at the time, the fact that they got this in vitro, that's kind of like the hardcore medical thing of the show.
Yeah.
And that itself is novel enough that would be, is reason enough to have their little storyline.
Yeah, and then there's a little business about their relationship. And then what I would consider the A story is about this John Doe number 6, who's a recurring character this whole season. He's got amnesia, and he had some surgery to relieve some pressure in his brain or something, but it has affected the part of his brain that cares. So he's in the psych ward and trying to figure out who he is, and he makes an attempt at that. And there's a very interesting guest star in the psych ward with him. So I don't know where we want to start with that. The Denzel thing, I don't know. There's not that much to talk about more than that.
Yeah.
Other than he says at the end they're falling asleep and he tells her he loves her.
Yeah.
And that relationship is always, she's like kind of a not wanting to settle down kind of person.
I kind of like, not knowing, I kind of surmised that was like significant, him saying that, but I didn't really know.
Yeah.
But I kind of guessed that was the thing.
like, so she's somebody I thought was on the show for a lot of it, but
yeah,
she's basically on just this one season.
Yeah.
And a few episodes here and there.
Okay. I think that's the kind of thing like I think that like their segments would probably be, if you were invested in the show and been following along with their relationship, it would mean a lot more than it does now if you're just picking this episode out as opposed to some of these other ones.
Mostly it's just seeing two good actors together. And the Ehrlich one is fairly small in this episode. So basically he's on the plastic surgery rotation. And Mark Harmon's Dr. Caldwell is the plastic surgeon. And they've had a lot of disagreements because Ehrlich likes to make jokes in the operating room, and they're usually insensitive about if their plastic surgeons want about someone's appearance, or I think he did bits with the breast implants or something, and he's gotten kicked out multiple times. And then Caldwell, so he was engaged, and that ended, and then this season he bought a house on the Cape, and he went up there, and he was having like a one-night stand with this woman from the hardware store who it turns out was like a heroin addict.
Wow.
She
There's a lot going on in that sense.
knifed him in the face.
Oh.
So now the plastic surgeon has a giant scar on his face.
Yeah. And I think, one thing, not to interrupt, but, well, I am interrupting, but I'm doing exactly what I meant to do, but the reason is there was like a previously on, and some episodes do have that, but it's more useful in others and some than others. And that one, I did see that enough to okay, this is why he's got kind of like this scarring and kind of stuff going on in his face. Yeah. So they did show a little bit of that.
And he's got a really bad attitude right now.
Yeah.
And I guess also there's his department is under pressure to sell enough product to sustain itself, and if not, it'll get shut down.
Right.
So Ehrlich thinks he's kind of upsold this guy on a iTuck.
Yeah.
While he's getting some legitimate thing done.
Well, that seems like a situation rife for abuse and a bad situation. The situation would incentivize doctors to do that.
Right, especially in an area that's about elective surgery.
Yeah.
This Caldwell's excuse later, well, it's elective, it's not unnecessary.
Yeah.
It has a benefit.
Right.
Because they want it. It'll make them feel better.
Yeah.
And his character there's always like this tension, internal tension he has, but like trying to be more of a person than just sort of a stereotypical plastic surgeon. Mm-hmm. Like being concerned with more than appearance.
Right.
But so Ehrlich goes to the patient and just questions him about, do you really want this? And the patient decides not to have it. And Caldwell's not happy about that. And they have a blowout. Yeah. And it's basically it, other than showing Ehrlich actually, as another character says, having a conscience about something.
Yeah, that's interesting. And, I could sort of see like Caldwell's point of view, because it is like going around him to get involved.
Yeah, but he's actually caring about the patient more than his career. For once.
Ehrlich is.
Yeah, Ehrlich is. So the other three stories I think are all pretty important, though, and worth talking about in a little more depth.
Yeah.
Than that. So the Dr. Craig one, taking this Yvonne, his daughter-in-law, back to her parents, is it's interesting because it shows the more human side of him a little bit, and he's able to make a decision that's a pretty big decision, but
right.
He's able to see something in other people.
I very much enjoyed it. It could have been like a very Pat storyline, like sort of the culture clash between like a working class person, and the kind of snooty Dr. Craig.
Yeah.
And really, like, I guess, like, one of the things is his counterpart invites him and basically kind of insists that, I'll take you out to, to dinner and nonsense, and you can see, like, and then he wants him to stay with him instead of at a hotel. And you can see Craig bristles just because he doesn't want to spend any time with the guy, period.
Yeah.
And so they kind of hang out, like, at these, like, kind of in these more working class areas. And it could have been very pat, the kind of thing that maybe I would criticize normally, but I thought it was very well done and surprising. And through the episode, you learn more about kind of each of them, but you learn more about, like why this guy's living in a trailer, for example.
Right.
And it's a very good conversation. It doesn't come off as false at all to me. I thought it was very well done, the whole story.
Yeah, Craig sees that guy as a lout.
Yeah.
And he's a big, soft-spoken guy, and he doesn't seem whatever Craig's standards is. He doesn't fit them.
Yeah.
Which again shows him being a snob and not just prejudice against a minority, but just anybody.
Right. And I like the fact that like they play darts, and Craig is good at darts.
Of course.
Like you said, he excels at everything, and he you get the feeling that he wouldn't have gone into he kind of had to have his arm twisted to get into like a game of darts to begin with.
Yeah.
But you could tell he wouldn't have done it if he didn't think that he could beat the guy.
Right. And part of the issue seems to be that Craig's son liked this guy more than he liked Craig. Saw him more as a father than he saw Craig.
And they kind of get into it, but it's obviously significant that in the will he gave custody of the to the other set of parents instead of his own parents.
Right.
Like his in-laws.
Yeah. And that's kind of what, as much as just seeing this guy as a decent guy, eventually he's seeing that she's taken care of.
Yeah.
This is not somebody. So the guy, they're talking later. They're at the trailer, and the baby wakes up and is crying and needs a change, and they're talking. And maybe because Craig is tired, he's a little more open to asking questions or something.
Yeah.
But he's why do you live in a trailer? And the guy explains that he used to have a house that his dad had bought after years of working hard and land that the house was on, and he sold it so his kids could go to college. So now all his kids are doing better than he was.
Yeah.
He wanted them to go to college and not have debts.
Right.
And I mean, his daughter's not because of being in a coma, but
Yeah.
she was like an academic. But one of his sons is working for Hewlett Packard, and another one's some kind of engineer, and that he did this for his kids.
Yeah.
So to me, that is like the whole you want your kids to have a better life than you thing. While like he says, 3 steps forward and 1 step back or something. In order for them to get ahead, he's not living better than his dad did.
Right. Because I think Craig points that out. Like, oh, well, you're kind of like, that's not what your dad wanted for you. Not really in a mean way, but he's pointing out that, well, what about this? And by the way, let me add that I don't know the actor who plays, I don't know his name, but I liked him because he looked to me like a cross between Jackie Gleason and the old pro wrestler Wahoo McDaniel. So
it's interesting because his name is Jackie McDaniel.
Oh, okay. Well,
or is it Wahoo Gleason?
Yeah, either one would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed the actor very much, though. And,
yeah.
And the scenes, the 2 scenes of them, they're very well done.
Yeah.
Excellent storyline, I thought.
And that's like, to me, like real male bonding, not out in the woods.
Yeah.
Getting drunk male bonding, but
or at the strip club.
Yeah. But like bonding over being fathers or whatever.
Yeah. It was very good, and it clearly has an effect on Daniels, and he kind of comes probably as close. You'd know better than me, but comes as close to as he could probably get to actually like giving him tacit support because he pretty much.
Well, I mean, the big thing is, so his wife expects that he's going to come back with the baby, and he doesn't, and she's like, "I hate you for this."
Yeah.
And their relationship is rocky for pretty much from the time the son dies, but. That's like another point of that, and then at some point they do get the baby. I think the in-laws realize they can't take care of their daughter and the baby at the same time and bring her back.
Oh, okay.
But then I think she goes, maybe when the daughter gets better, she goes back again.
Yeah.
The 6th season there, the Craigs are separated and maybe getting divorced, and like by that point, I think in the 5th season, Bonnie Bartlett becomes a regular cast member. So there's a lot more about their personal life.
It's interesting because of the three like storylines that we're sort of highlighting here, the main storylines. This was the one that was most obviously serialized, and that I could tell right away was based on things that had gone on before that I hadn't seen, and things that would go on yet. To me, it was the most accessible in its serialization because I could tell right away. Whereas some of the other ones, or the other 2, like I did not know I mean, maybe in the previously, but I didn't know that the man, the John Doe was a recurring character.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that the astronaut had, that was kind of a thing that had already been established so much. It was less apparent, and I don't know if it really hurt the episode that I hadn't seen the other stuff, but I did kind of feel like, I missed out on something.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, though, it was so good that it put me right in there, and it didn't really matter that it was serialized. They explained everything was evident from what was presented.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the John Doe could, I don't know if you need any, I mean, that he's an amnesiac, and I guess they don't really say that, but he doesn't know who he is. So that seems the big part of it, but any of his episodes are about the same idea of him exploring who he is and trying to find it.
But was this like was this the only episode with the guest star?
Yes.
It was with him in the ward? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually had 2 big guest stars.
That's right. There's one we haven't mentioned.
Yeah. So the astronaut storyline.
Yeah, maybe we should get to that. Yeah.
Yeah. I already mentioned having Robert Guillaume.
Yeah, Robert Guillaume's
Bar syndrome.
And
and Morrison's been treating him, and I think he did diagnose whatever this Guillaume guy. Just not good with.
Yeah, I don't remember what it's called.
But it's something that causes temporary paralysis. And so Morrison's deal is that he went to like a Mexican medical school, and at some point that kind of gets found out that it's not like a totally legit degree. And it was like a rush program, and he's got like a lack of confidence about himself and his ability to diagnose things, and it takes him a long time to find his feet, especially, and terrible things keep happening to him. And his wife dies, and her heart gets donated for the heart transplant they do, and then that woman dies. And I mean, they're really powerful episodes, but this poor guy, and then later, like I mentioned, I think it's in this season, he's doing like an outreach thing at a prison, and he gets attacked and raped, and then later his little boy accidentally shoots the guy. The guy gets out of prison. Speaking of melodramatic, gets out of prison and tracks him down. And Morrison had a gun because he knew this guy was out there. His kid thinks it's a toy gun.
Oh gosh.
And shoots the guy. He also dates Helen Hunt.
Oh man, the final indignity for this character.
Yeah, and Patricia Wedding, and of course he's friends with the rapist guy. He goes through a lot. That's all I'm saying. But anyway, I think he did successfully diagnose this and is trying to. He's always, you hear patient-centered care. He's like the poster boy for that. That's all he's always like maybe cares too much. That's his cross, and gets kind of occasionally taken advantage of because of that. But he's wanting to take care of this guy, and the military or NASA has sent this Navy doctor played by Betty White, and she appeared in a season 3 episode where the first lady was coming through town, and they just needed their hospital to be on call for a certain period of time while the motorcade was going by, and then there was a whole brouhaha about blood and stuff.
I did watch that episode. You recommended that to me. I did watch that. So I'd seen her earlier appearance, and they established a few things that came into play.
And she and Westphall had known each other in medical school, and then she in both episodes kind of wants to
take things a little.
Yes. Yeah. And he's a widower, so he is available.
No.
So she comes to check this guy out and see if they want to transport him back to Bethesda or not. But it really seems like she's there too, because he had gone on the news or something and said some things about God and stuff. And she seems really there to evaluate his mental state, and he wants Morrison to protect him. And basically, the idea is, as long as his doctor says he can't leave, then he doesn't have to leave.
Right.
So Morrison stands up for him, and she's not happy about that.
Yeah.
And then she goes to talk to Westphall, and they have kind of that's as gruff as he gets in this episode. But he's pretty sharp with her.
Yeah.
He basically tells her she's a sellout.
Yeah. And to me, though, it was in the service of protecting his staff and doing the right thing.
And this patient,
He's saying, hey, the best interest of the patient are served by listening to his doctor. If his doctor supports it, then and that's the end of the story, is what he's saying.
Right. And that she, by doing this sort of bureaucratic job, has lost the sight of being a doctor.
Yeah. She's like more interested in PR than medicine right now.
Right.
Or however he puts it.
Yeah. And then she's like, well, I guess I'm not sleeping with you tonight.
Yeah. It's well played. I mean, this is on this very podcast, we've talked about Betty White, her comedic talents, but I just want to emphasize it because some of the stuff that I've said about the tone of the show and stuff, she's not doing this role for comedy.
No.
She's just being a good actress, and to me, totally convincing and very good in both the episodes that I've seen as her as this character.
With just a hint of Sue Ann, I guess. And a side note, Ed Flanders is on a really good episode of The Mary Tyler Moore Show, where he plays a priest who Mary thinks is maybe going to leave the priesthood because he's in love with her. And he's not. But
okay, I checked that one out.
I think there's a MASH episode he's on too, which I haven't seen. But
I've heard of that. Because I was curious because I didn't remember him being in much stuff other than this.
And he has some sort of record for playing Harry Truman 3 or 4 times.
Okay, I don't think I've ever seen that. Yeah.
Thanks.
And I didn't know that he had taken his own life and died relatively young.
Yeah.
So
early 60s maybe.
Yeah, I think
he's
like
in his
61 or
50s
something, like barely out of his 50s.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, so he's got comedy chops too.
Yeah, and the scenes with him and Betty White are great too.
Yeah.
So again, I think this storyline's like the astronaut thing was a little, I wouldn't say it was distinguished to me one way or the other, that part of it, but the storyline overall, I'd give that another big thumbs up.
So the one about the amnesiac, I mean, this is really the crux of this episode. So he's had this surgery, he's not caring about things, he's just watching the news, and one of the guys in the psych ward is complaining about it, and it's Mr. Carlin from the Bob Newhart Show.
Yeah.
Who, again, I haven't really seen a lot of that, but he's the patient that Bob couldn't help, basically.
Yeah.
And
John Doe was on that actor was on the Bob Newhart Show too.
Okay.
Like they had I think those two often like clashed heads.
Okay.
As patients in Bob's group. I don't know the actor's name.
Yeah, I don't either.
But I think Oliver or something maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of a callback to a lot of the Bob Newhart Show. But yeah, he's definitely playing the same character that Jack Riley is.
So he's annoyed that he's always watching the news, and the psychiatrist, who's a recurring character, is like, maybe you should watch something else, and he changes the channel and the White Shadow's on.
Yeah.
And Carlin makes some snarky comments about that.
I did laugh at that, yes. I thought it was great.
And another side note, in the first season, the main psychiatrist was played by G.W. Bailey.
Ah, yes.
Of Police Academy
I
fame.
think he was in the pilot maybe, or one of the episodes, and I was kind of disappointed that he wasn't in...
In the second season, in a recurring role, Paul Sand played the psychiatrist.
Oh, wow.
And then this guy's been around.
Yeah,
off and on.
Definitely a veteran TV actor, but no G.W. Bailey.
No. So later, like Carlin and John Doe get in a fight over changing channels, but later he's flipping around and very quickly goes through Hill Street Blues, Newhart, WKRP, Lou Grant, which I had to kind of rewind. I'm like, I know that song. Yeah. It's all theme songs, and then like the very end of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and because of the news connection and trying to find his identity or something, he decides that he's Mary Richards.
Yeah. And by the way, what a happening TV town Boston is to get all these shows like at the same time.
Right.
They definitely have some quality television going on there.
Yeah, it's like the middle of the afternoon.
Yeah, good reruns. They're not just showing game shows.
No. Or maybe that's the St. Elsewhere, St. Eligius.
Oh, the in-house St. Eligius Hospital Network.
Right.
Proud to present multiple channels of quality entertainment.
I could see that. That would be great, isn't it? Hospital. We have local news and all the MTM productions.
Yeah.
So this involves him setting up a desk and a phone and pretending he's Mary at her desk. He's wearing a little knitted cap. He keeps calling Carlin Rhoda, which seems appropriate somehow. The Dr. Weiss comes in and he calls him Lou, and then he sees Auslander in the hall and calls him Murray.
Yeah, he gets really excited to see him.
He's bald.
Murray! Yeah. I did enjoy that too.
And he decides he's going to throw a party.
Yeah.
He also has an encounter with Betty White, which is a nice little thing.
Oh, yeah.
He thinks she's Sue Ann.
Yeah.
The only person who actually looks like...
Yeah. And she says, like, oh, you must have me mixed up with someone. She pretty much keeps walking.
Right. So he throws this party, and Dr. Weiss gets Auslander to come to the party. He just thinks whatever's going on is going to be good for him.
Yeah, it seems very indulgent, but hey, what do I know?
Yeah.
He's the doctor, so if he thinks it's better for him to engage in this, more power.
But the parties are kind of a real stinker.
As Mary Richards' parties always were.
Yeah, but then later the party gets good, and he's upset. John Doe's upset because the party's supposed to be a bad party.
Yeah.
And he does his best Mary Tyler Moore crying and then Carlin gets in a fight with somebody, and John Doe attacks that guy.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what he realizes, well, Mary Richards would never do that.
Right.
So I'm not Mary Richards.
Yeah, I don't remember too many brawls that Mary Richards got into on the show. So that's probably not a little uncharacteristic of her.
Oh, yeah. If she could avoid getting in a brawl with Cloris Leachman's character.
Yeah, she would do it. She didn't get into many bar fights.
No. Lou Grant did, maybe.
Yeah, he I'm sure, had a couple of bare-knuckle brawls.
Yeah. Stripped down to his
Yeah.
sleeveless undershirt.
Yeah. Put him up.
So his quest for identity goes on. But then at the very end of the show, he goes outside with Dr. Auslander and says, I am going to make it after all, and throws his hat in the air.
Like a freeze frame.
Yeah.
So that character continues.
Yes, and then a couple of other people show up who claim to be his relatives from New Orleans and abscond with him, and it turns out they were all from the same asylum. I think maybe he is wealthy. I don't know. There's something. It's a whole con, but they're all a little bit crazy, and they're saying they're all actors, and these people are acting very theatrically. And then in the 5th season, he comes back briefly and is helping Dr. Craig write his memoirs, and that he's typing them for him, but they're boring, so they end up writing or Craig ends up writing this tawdry novel based obviously on stuff going on there, and he absconds with that and then gets it published.
Wow.
In TV fashion very quickly.
Yeah.
And he and Craig have some words about that, and then come to an agreement that he can go on playing the charade that he's the writer of this, and they'll split the profits.
Makes sense.
But it's part of his identity thing. He decides that he's Dr. Craig.
Yeah. I don't know. Would you want to be Dr. Craig? Which doctor would you want to be at St. Eligius?
Well, Auslander has liver cancer, and he used to run a hospital.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I read that originally that character was not supposed to be a long-term thing, but they liked his performance so much that they let him recover from the liver cancer.
I think so.
Because in the pilot, they make which I just watched, they make a point of saying how ironic it is that a liver specialist has liver cancer, but they make it sound like it's only a matter of time.
Yeah. Also, even though it's 6 seasons, it only takes place over 3 years. So each season is like half a year.
Oh, okay.
Because the residency is only 3 years. So I think there's a joke in one episode where Howie Mandel's mom says it's 2 years, but it's felt like 5 or something.
Yeah.
And as much as I like Ed Flanders and I like the Westphall character, I mean, he is dealing with a lot too. And he has an autistic son, and his wife died. Dr. Craig's, I wouldn't want to be him.
Right.
I wouldn't want to be a doctor.
Yeah,
that's what it's getting down to.
It's tough. Yeah, there's not a lot of good choices, it seems like.
No. Maybe Denzel, because he quits
Yeah.
being a doctor at the end
On good,
of the
he's
series.
on good terms and relatively good health.
Yeah.
Yeah, this definitely isn't like Chad Everett on Medical Center or Marcus Welby. I mean, these doctors have issues and problems.
Right. Definitely not Elliot Stephen First. I mean, Ehrlich's life works out pretty well. He marries one of the nurses. His parents are Steve Allen and
Jane Meadows.
Jay Meadows.
Oh wow. Nice.
His aunt is Mary Hartman.
Oh, Louise Lasser.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting casting.
Yeah. How about you? You don't want to be a doctor.
I think I kind of agree with you. You talked me out of
Yeah.
really picking anybody. They kind of got their ups and downs. I mean, I would like to think that if I were Craig, though, I'd be a little bit less insufferable. I could find a way to modify my behavior a little bit. But
Yeah. Well, if you had gone to the University of Pennsylvania instead of Penn State, you would probably be insufferable, right?
yeah, perhaps.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
And he always taught. There's a thing. So he met his wife there, and but I didn't say Bonnie Bartlett's William Daniels' wife in real life. But that the characters met there, and he always says she's the prettiest woman who ever attended UPenn, except for Candace Bergen or something. But he always says Candy Bergen. But I did have to check, and they weren't there. Wouldn't have been there at the same time. I mean, Candace Bergen is not 90.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, though. It's a great character.
Yeah.
And I really like his scenes, and just anything with him it's interesting. He's kind of like a good character. You sort of love to hate, maybe, but
Yeah.
definitely watchable.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It could go another way where he is insufferable, but I really enjoy watching him. So
Yeah.
definitely one
And
of my...
because his insufferability is often played for laughs.
Yeah. If I had to power rank the characters, he would probably be number 2 behind Flanders.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, we love David Morse, David Hack Morse,
Yes.
and I'm all even though when I see him in other stuff, I'm always happy to see him.
Yeah.
And I think
An actor's actor.
an actor's actor, and I think when he's in the Crossing Guard, that Sean Penn movie,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
surprised to see him playing such an aggressive character.
Yeah.
But he is. I mean, here he's such a quiet character, but I mean, he's a big guy.
Yeah, he's a physically pretty imposing guy.
Yeah. He was, in this era, pretty skinny, but he is an imposing guy. Yeah, I like just about everybody. We didn't also mention, because he wasn't in it, but Luther, the orderly who eventually becomes a physician's assistant. And his character is kind of interesting, like his mom was a nurse at the hospital, and he kind of grew up there. But the actor, whose name I'm going to mispronounce, Eric Lenoyvel or something like that, directed like a season's worth of episodes over the course of the series.
Wow.
And is still a director. I saw his name on, I think, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or something recently.
Nice.
Which is just another one of those, just like Thomas Carter and Kevin Hooks directed White Shadow episodes and went on to direct, I think Thomas Carter directed the pilot of St. Elsewhere. So more credit to Bruce Paltrow for giving people a chance to do stuff.
I very much like this episode, but I'll also say that I was glad that I'd watched some other episodes first. It does seem to me like kind of a hard episode to watch one at a time.
Yeah,
I mean, you can, but it would be much more rewarding. It's tough it's tough for me to recommend people just like kind of cherry pick episodes, because I think and I've said, like, we talked about Hill Street Blues, and that was another one I hadn't watched very much.
Yeah.
But Hill Street Blues, I didn't really wind up diving into it. But this, I'm kind of interested in watching more episodes, and I think I might, because there's just something about it resonates more with me. Maybe it's been a while since I've watched a good doctor show. I don't know what it is. But there's something about the characters and the performances to me. And again, it's artificial to pit two shows against each other, even if they are linked. But I just like this show. There's just something about it that speaks to me more. I think some of the main actors are more appealing. And, despite what I said about like the tone being kind of a little out there sometimes, it's very entertaining. And I've enjoyed like all the episodes I've seen so far. Now, it does seem like the pilot is it seems like there's a lot more going on there that maybe, as you said, it took maybe a season to really find its way.
And I mean, I haven't gone back and watched any more Hill Street, even though I said I was going to. But I obviously had no problem watching 6 seasons of this. So.
Yeah.
I mean, it's less chaotic too than Hill Street, which helps. And I get it. It seems to me, despite it being dark and there being a lot of unhappy things, that there's because it's a medical show, there's also room for sort of really happy things to happen, surprisingly happy things or optimistic things. It's not every patient who comes in there dies.
Yeah. Well, and you know what else? We didn't mention, like, visually, like the handheld, the camera work, and it was kind of, it looked a little bit different than, again, kind of like Trapper John. I keep mentioning that, even though I didn't really watch Trapper John.
Right.
But it wasn't as frenetic as Hill Street Blues, you say. And ER would kind of take it to another level.
Yeah.
But some of that technique of shooting a hospital show, right here, I happened to see there was an original New York Times review of St. Elsewhere from like the first season, and it was already praising it, and it made a point to mention how it was considered visually bold for the time, and praised it for how stylish it was.
Interesting.
Which is something that, like, today, a lot of it doesn't necessarily seem that way.
I mean, it looks dirty and
Yeah.
run down, and the ER scenes are fairly intense. The ER obviously kind of changed the game on that, but they have some of that same energy to them.
Right. Yeah.
In a much smaller space, and but it's a lot of the same stuff, stat and intubate and all that stuff. But they're also not afraid to show the boredom of it, just like Homicide was kind of reveled in showing the boredom of waiting for something to happen.
Right.
And like the last season gets a little more polished because like a Kaiser type company comes in and buys the hospital, tries to gussy it up, and kind of fails. But and that's weird too. Like even on Hulu, like the company is named like Ecumena, I think, or something like that, and like they have to put up a thing before the credits saying this isn't. Yeah. And then halfway through, they had to, at least in show, they had to change the name of it, which I assume is another commentary on. They must have gotten a cease and desist from someone. Right.
Another thing that's interesting is, and I think I read some confirmation of this, but if you go through and look at the episode descriptions, it seems like because you've mentioned some of these like storylines and the way they ended series, it seemed like they wrote each they would end the season as if they might not be coming back or they weren't 100% sure, but they'd give sort of things that could provide some kind of closure, or would be like, okay, this is a logical end, but they would come back. And even like, like you said, like characters would leave and come back. And
yeah, so like you mentioned Westphall saying he's going to leave. And so he seemingly does. And then at the beginning of this season, season 4, he comes back.
Yeah.
He's been in Ethiopia,
Yeah.
kind of finding himself. And
Now, I don't remember that it being as like a perpetual bubble show as much as some of the others, but I do seem to remember like back in the 80s, like at least 1 or 2 seasons where it was considered like a kind of a little bit of a surprise, or at least kind of like not at all a certainty that it would come back. So.
And the 5th season ends with a wrecking ball hitting it.
Oh, well, that's a pretty good indication, yes.
Yeah. And I feel like they must have gotten okay, we'll give you 1 more season kind of thing. And then they had to figure out, what do we do now? We have to place with the wrecking ball. But it was sort of a cliffhanger, too, because Auschlander's, like, in the hospital.
Okay.
He just suffered something involving his cancer or something.
Yeah.
But
Well, the 3 leads are great. There's so much going on here, and to its credit, it does juggle a lot of these storylines and things. I think it does what it's doing very well, so I have a lot of respect for the show.
yeah, I do. I mean, it is kind of inconsistent, but I think it's just part of that's the nature of TV then. I think anything from back then is more consistent than now, where there's like this, whether it's a serialized thing where you're trying to tell a full story, or it's an episodic show where they're just trying to do the same thing every time. Like there's not this in between where they're trying all sorts of different things and willing to be inconsistent. And now, you would probably be, whatever, people complain online, well, this character isn't behaving like they did 5 years ago. Yeah. So they would never do this.
Right.
And
this kind of show is difficult to pull
exhausting.
off under any circumstances, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I would just give the caveat that I think the serialization of it is pretty intense, and it might be difficult for people to just jump on everywhere. But
yeah, I think so. I mean, you might be able to jump in maybe near the end of season 1 and go into season 2 or something. But
yeah, it's not impenetrable, but there are definitely elements that reward viewers who stick with the show. I mean,
yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm glad we could talk about this, and I'm glad you watched the whole series.
Yeah, it was exhausting, but it made the paying for that commercial-free Hulu worthwhile.
There you go.
Wouldn't have happened without that.
But they've made a lot of our episodes possible, so
yeah,
I will thank them for having accumulated a lot of classic television over the last 5 years.
Yes. Okay.
This episode brought to you by St. Eligius Hospital, doctors who care. This episode also brought to you by Spike Jones Medical Center, doctors with funny voices. This episode also brought to you by Snow Globes. Join us next time for another exciting episode of Battle of the Network Shows. Learn more, leave feedback, and suggest future episodes at battleofthenetworkshows.com. Follow us on Twitter at BatNetShows, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Battle of the Network Shows.